What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and today, the video a portion of you have been waiting for. Here's my Guilds of Ravnica top 25.
And I'm your favorite magic channel's favorite magic channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck techs. I come correct like a porn star, slicing up all these other suckers with my sword Mars.
Now, just a couple of quick tings before we get down to business here. First of all, if you watch this entire video, you don't see a card you're like super stoked on, then don't despair. Might have already appeared on my top 10 sleepers list. Link in the description to that, so watch that after you watch this. Help my metrics out, dog. But aside from that, I think the only thing I have to say is like, do the YouTube stuff. Call to action. Brothers and sisters, like the video if you got time to do it, and subscribe if you haven't done that yet, because next week, I'm going to start rolling out the deck techs. It's a good time to be alive, y'all, so make sure you subscribe if you haven't done it yet, and let's talk about some cards. Alright, well, let's kind of ease into things, just dip our toes, don't want to move too fast. We'll talk about my top 5 uncommons in the set first, because there's actually a huge amount of, power density at the uncommon rarity in this set. And there could even be a top 10 uncommons, like District Guide didn't make the list, but this is a strictly better Civic Wayfinder in most ways, for most purposes, so that card was playable, sign me up. Plague Crafter, this is for most purposes a strictly better Fleshbag Marauder, and that card was playable, so again, sign me up. But even Goblin Crater Maker looks like a fine card. Removal spell on a body that can also take out random Eldrazi and ensnaring bridges in older formats. So yeah, it sounds fine as well. There's even stuff here for removal nerds. I really like Justice Strike. Looks like a fine card as well. A little narrow, but this is going to take out its fair share of Galtas and Lyras and Doom Whisperers and all kinds of stuff out of the sideboard. So it's worth talking about. But my number 5 uncommon in the set is a pretty freaking good removal spell too, and it's Necrotic Wound. I think that a lot of decks that aren't even really on an Undergrowth plan are going to play a copy or two of this card in the main deck, and decks that are on the Undergrowth plan, this is actually one of the best payoffs for it. It's also great if you're on the Stitcher's Supplier plan. These pair up really well, and it pairs up really well with my number 4 uncommon, Glowspore Shaman. Yeah, this is great as a 2-drop for the Undergrowth decks, but I actually think it might rise to prominence as a little bit more than just that. This is a really low-cost creature, only 2 converted mana cost, for 3 power, and it essentially lets you almost guarantee your 3rd or 4th or 5th land drop or whatever you need. So that could be really important too. I think this is a better creature than it looks. But even if it doesn't see any play outside of the Undergrowth decks, it's obviously the premier 2-drop for those decks. Let's get back to talking about that sweet, juicy removal, y'all, with my number 3 uncommon, Conclave Tribunal. This looks super busted. You could actually potentially get this for no mana. But very often it's just going to cost you, 2 mana, which is a great deal to take out the best non-land permanent on the battlefield, and it's going to be insane for tokens-based decks or really any deck that plays a bunch of creatures in the early game, which it turns out, kind of a lot of Magic decks, so I like the card a lot. Number 2 uncommon in the set is Lava Coil, which is actually kind of similar. It can only hit creatures, and it can only hit for so much, but it always costs 2, no matter what. You ain't got no creatures, that's fine. It's fine, cuz. Just pay 2 mana. We got your back, Sorcery speed kind of sucks, but just the ability to take out Rekindling Phoenix is, if nothing else, for just 2 mana is going to be a huge game, and this also is a good replacement for cards like Cut to Ribbons that allowed, aggro decks and red-based decks in general to be able to take out Steel Leaf Champion for only 2 mana. But my number 1 uncommon in the set is definitely Chemister's Insight. Totally serious about this one. I know that it could be Lava Coil or Conclave Tribunal, and most people would be happier with that, but I have been in the lab with this card a little bit, and testing has verified this card is absolutely bonkers. I don't think some people have fully grasped yet, or in some cases remembered yet, the awesome power of a card advantage spell like this that you can cast twice in the same game. It's just super crazy. So far, it's been really, really impressive to me. The first copy will often put you ahead on cards and help you, turn the corner against some opponents, and the second copy will just put the game away. It's unbelievable selection, let you throw away useless stuff, any lands that you picked up you might not need, or you can just discard other copies of Chemister's Insight to jumpstart a Chemister's Insight. It's happened more than once to me, so this card is just unbelievable. I'll have more to say about it during Deck Tech season, but yes, this is the replacement for Glimmer of Genius we wanted. Anyway, hope that was quick enough. Let's actually get to the real list here. Kick it off with number 25, Divine Visitation. Now, I'll be completely honest with you. With my number 25 and my number 24, these are cards that are really, really good looking, but they're going to have to prove themselves to me. I'm a little bit wary of a 5-mana enchantment that is very likely to not do anything. During the spoiler video where I covered this card, I went through 8 or 10 different cards that allow you to create tokens the turn this enters the battlefield really easily. So if you can get at least one, in some cases 2 angels off of it on turn 5, then it's a ridiculous card. But again, you got to do that, and time will tell, hopefully very soon, whether or not it's a viable game plan. Now, my number 24 is a card that could seriously be one of the best cards in the set, or it could be a total bust, and that's why it's all the way down here at number 24. But again, there's a ridiculous amount of potential on Runaway Steam-Kin. This card looks pretty dumb, you know. I think in some cases it's just going to be a 2-mana 4/4, that's a great rate, right? Who wouldn't want that? But in other cases, it's going to be a great ramp piece for you, and who would want that? So I think when this card is doing the right things for you and you're casting the spells to make it bigger, it can actually be a really threatening turn 2, you know, creature. Not to mention the fact that there's a much vaunted turn 1 kill in Modern with this card that you'll literally never pull off. You have about the same odds of drawing all those cards. I think it's actually less odds than you do of pulling a Royal Flush in poker. So it's just, you're never going to get the turn 1 win in Modern, but it's at least possible. This card just has so many people talking that it has to be on the list somewhere, although, just like Visitation, it's going to have to prove itself before it can, you know, before it moves up the list at any point. But this could be a good card for making opponents run away. So I really like the cut of its jib. But we're at number 23, and this is where we hit a little pocket of like gold legendary creatures, starting with Izoni, who might be baloney. You know, I have my reservations about a 6-drop, especially in a color pairing that wants to play, you know, Vraska Relic Seeker, or maybe Muldrotha at the 6-drop slot, maybe Carnage Tyrant. There are some, you know, sort of better looking options than this for some decks. But if the right deck comes along, this might actually be the best Undergrowth payoff in the entire format. It's reanimatable. If you play it in the same deck with Muldrotha, sure, you got a lot of 6-drops going on, but this can come back into play over and over in that deck and just get you all the little crawling dudes. So I think that this card has a shot, not to mention the activated ability is really good. So this could see play if the format slows down enough. Now, my number 22 is Niv Mizzet Para, and this is one of my personal favorite cards from the set because I love Niv Mizzet, but I gotta be honest, you know, we'll put him down here at number 22 because especially in a format with like Assassin's Trophy, Price of Fame, a bunch of other removal spells that can take this out, I don't like it as much, especially given how difficult it kind of looks to cast. But that's mitigated by the fact that we have Dragon's Horde, and especially Sarkhan Fireblood in this format, make it much, much easier to cast this card. So if Grixis Dragons is a deck, this might possibly be a key 1 or 2 of in it. Plus, I will say I do like the fact that even if it does get shot down the turn you play it, it'll usually trade for a card anyway, so that's not too bad. And if it sticks around for any more than a turn or 2, it has the potential to do a buttload of damage for you. So I think this is a very real card, but we'll have to wait and see. But even if it's not super standard playable, I imagine this will be a Commander All-Star until we all die. And probably long after, but my number 21 is Imara, Soul of the Accord. This is a little bit smaller than the other 2 legends we've covered so far, but that's one of the reasons I like it. You know, a 2-mana cost creature with all of this value is actually a good deal, I think. You know, sometimes this will represent 3 power for 2 mana the turn after you play it. All that's good. Usually, you won't get much value out of it until the turn after you play it. But, you remember, you can tap creatures for Convoke the turn they enter the battlefield. Yes, you can do that. So sometimes this will get you a 1/1 the turn you play it, if you have like a Conclave Tribunal you want to play on top of it. So I think there's a lot of really good things about this card. You know, if it creates any more than 1 extra power for you, then it's just doing ridiculous work. You know, if this ever puts 2 tokens out in the same game, that's 3 bodies, you know, that's more for Convoke, that's more towards the City's Blessing if that's what you're trying to do. You know, it's just a pretty powerful card that helps you go wide all by itself, and I think it's probably going to see some play. If Selesnya is a deck, this is the premier 2-drop. My number 20 is Midnight Reaper, another one of my favorite cards in the set on a personal level. I think that everything about this card is really cool, from the art to the flavor and blah blah blah. But also, big fan of the text box, and that's why it's actually on this list, because I'm trying to remain objective. I think you do fear the Reaper, you know, if you come up against him. This, at least when it dies, is going to draw you a card, if nothing else, so that's pretty good. But if you're in an aristocrats strategy of some kind where you're sacrificing creatures, then this can get ridiculous very fast. Plus, the stats aren't terrible for the mana cost by itself, you know? Even if you're not sacrificing a bunch of creatures, every creature that you just lose in combat, which kind of tends to happen in a game of Magic, you know, kind of fairly often, then you'll be way up on your opponent in card advantage. For every creature you trade in combat, you're actually up a card on them, which is super important. So I think Midnight Reaper is a great 3-drop. But we've cracked the teens here. My number 19 is Unmoored Ego. More like Super Ego, but this is a good card. As a matter of fact, I do think it id. I definitely think it's being overvalued by large portions of the community, but at the end of the day, it's still going to see a lot of standard sideboard play, and possibly modern sideboard play. People are talking about this getting Valakuts and obviously Tron lands, but I think that the most play it's going to see is probably in standard as a 2 or 3 of sideboard piece against all kinds of stuff. People say obviously it dismantles combos. It dismantles a lot more than that. So I expect to see a lot of copies of these in blue-black base control sideboards, but I don't think it's the main deck card that some people think it is. But if you're one of those players that expected to see Unmoored Ego a little higher on the list, like some people had cards in their top 10, why do you get a load of my number 18? Which is Mission Briefing. It's still on the list, though. It's still on the list. I think this is a playable card, but this is probably, from my estimation, the single most overvalued card in this entire set. You really, really can't overestimate how much that body means to a card like Snapcaster Mage. The body is the whole reason you play it, in some cases. Obviously, the ETB effect's the whole reason you play it, but you wouldn't play it if it didn't have the body. So this doesn't look quite as good as some say it looks, but again, I'll defend that by saying this is a good card. This doesn't look as bad as some pro writers say it looks. Although there are some issues, if you want to recast a Sinister Sabotage out of your graveyard, you better have 4 blue mana lying around. That's a little tougher than it sounds. So there are some issues with the card, but again, I think control decks will definitely want a copy or 2 of this to recast. Again, Sinister Sabotage or any other counter spells, removal spells. This just looks really, really good at instant speed, and you're very often gonna be able to do it at the end of your opponent's turn, surveil a couple of cards into the graveyard, and get something juicy out. So I do think the card has a level of spice, but I don't think it's the all-star a lot of people think it is. Now, my number 17 is Ionize. This is probably higher up the list than a lot of people expected it, but I actually think this is a really, really, really good card, as a matter of fact. Now, I know it looks kind of unimpressive to some players. It doesn't actually affect the game in any way, aside from the 2 damage to them. But unlike a card like Sinister Sabotage, which helps dump cards in your yard for advantage or maybe fix your next draw step, this doesn't affect the game in such an important way or an impactful way, like a card like Sabotage does, which is probably like the honorable mention on my uncommons list. I didn't mention it, but I should have. People will play 4 of those in like every control deck. So that's another good uncommon from the set. But in any case, I think Ionize still stakes a claim, considering Counterburn is a very real deck, you guys. I'm totally serious. I can't absolutely say that it's going to be one of the best decks in the format. Nobody knows. And if somebody tells you that they know what the format's going to be like, they are lying to you or themselves or both. So, nobody absolutely knows. But I think that Counterburn is actually a great way to counter other control decks rising to prominence in the format, and it's a great way to deal with Turbo Fog, which does still look like too real of a deck going into the next format. So I think this is a great answer for decks that may eventually take over the format, and that makes it a deck worth looking at, and Ionize is the whole reason it exists. Now, number 16 is Aurelia, Exemplar of Justice. This is a better card than I think some people are giving it credit for, mostly because it's going to play such a vital role in the Boros aggro deck. That deck needs a card, it turns out, that is able to get past or play through the big mono-green stompy decks. It looks like mono-green stompy might be a great week 1, week 2 deck in this format. It's just got the strongest creatures, a simple game plan, curves out extremely well. It almost goldfishes. It really doesn't care that much about what you're doing. And decks like that can sometimes be very strong in the beginning of formats while control decks are still trying to find their feet and stuff. So with that said, if mono green stompy or green black stompy or whatever people choose to play is as real of a deck as it looks like early on in the format, then I think this card may actually be really important for playing through those strategies. It gives you a flying threat, makes your smaller creatures able to fight with the bigger mono green creatures. I just think there's all kinds of reasons that Aurelia is going to see at least 2 of play in the Boros aggro deck, because Boros looks like the correct direction to go for aggro decks right now. Very attractive looking deck, and Aurelia is a big part of that. And without it, those decks wouldn't have a way to fight through bigger mid-range strategies. With it, they absolutely do, and it's going to be an important factor to ending a lot of games in that aggro deck. Now, my number 15 is Lazav the Multifarious, and its spot on the list is a result of me attempting to be objective. I actually think this card's in the top 10 in the set, but again, I don't know that. Like, there are probably 14 other cards that I know for sure are going to have an impact. And I don't know for sure this is, but this looks like a knockout for, for all intents and purposes. I don't see a format where this card doesn't at least see some play. Again, very, very low casting cost. 2 converted mana cost is a great way to spend your mana if you're spending it on something like this. It's got a decent enter the battlefield trigger that'll at least help you fix your next draw, dump something in your graveyard if that's what you want to do. All that's gravy. It's got at least decent butt to block in the very, very early game, but this is a 2-drop that has extreme relevance the later on the game goes, and I love 2-drops that do that. When your 2-drop is really good on turn 8, you've probably got something special, and Lazav does that in pretty much any creature-based deck or any mid-range deck that plays, anywhere between 18 and 26 creatures. You don't have to have that many to make Lazav very live. Now, my number 14 is Ral Izzet Viceroy. Now, this is another card that some people probably would want in their top 10, but I'm not sure, especially in a format that includes Teferi, which is just a much better Planeswalker by every measure. This card's going to see all the play. But that being said, it looks like blue-red, control is a thing. I've already talked about Counterburn. It definitely wants a card like this. And, Jeskai control could be a thing. That deck will play Teferi, but it might also want 1 copy of Ral for easier ending the game outright. For, in some cases, a better removal ability. Again, narrow cases, but some cases, a better removal ability. With Jumpstart in the format, the +1 is very attractive, So there are really good things about this Planeswalker. Doesn't necessarily stack up to Teferi very well, but in a vacuum, the card is nuts and probably will end up seeing some small amount of play. Or a large amount of play. Remains to be seen, but a card that I think will see more play than you think it will is Mausoleum's Secrets here at number 13. Even if this card doesn't ever see any standard play, it's going to be a very, very important commander card until literally the end of time. The end of time. When the last person stops playing Magic and the sun goes out, this card will stop being important. But until then, it's probably going to be really, really good in EDH. So pick up your copies, because 3 to 5 years from now, this could be a $20 card, and I'm totally not kidding. And in Modern, in Legacy, it's fine too. This can find a Death Shadow for you, or other, very, very cheap black cards. Like even just a Street Wraith in your graveyard finds you a Death Shadow, which actually seems really good in Modern, But even in Standard, this has some really good things it can do. We've got plenty of ways to fuel creatures into our graveyard with Surveil and the different Undergrowth mechanic cards, Stitcher Supplier, Glowspore Shaman, all that. So it's not too tough to abuse this card. And when you do get it gassed up enough, you can just go get whatever you want. You got a bunch of creatures in there. Go get a Vraska Relic Seeker. Go get a Muldrotha. That's good. You can go get an Atrata if you got 4 creatures in your graveyard. Go get a Lazav if you only have 2 creatures in your graveyard. There are plenty of reasons to want to play this card, even in a format like Standard. So I love it. Love it. And again, even if it doesn't see play in any competitive formats, it will be an important EDH card. Pick up your copies. Now, for numbers 12 and 11, I really couldn't pick which sweeper I like the best, so I'm just going to talk about Ritual of Soot and Deafening Clarion for these 2 slots. Now, these sweepers go in very different decks, unless you want to try Mardu Control. I don't think you want to, but who knows, maybe. You could do that, but obviously in blue-black base control decks, maybe Esper, Grixis, whatever, Ritual of Soot is a premier sweeper that'll basically reset the board, especially if you're on the play, It doesn't perform super well against Vine Mirror or anything, but this is going to blow away just about everything else in the early game, and that's going to be really important. It's exactly what a control deck wants its sweeper to do. Deafening Clarion, though, this goes in the Jeskai decks, and that's going to be really good. It could even go in the Boros decks as a sideboard piece, but I think this will see more play as a 2, possibly 3 of, depending on how strong aggro is. In the main deck of Jeskai Control, man, it fits really, really well there. You will very, very occasionally use the lifelink ability, but of course, mostly, you just want a small sweeper that, unlike Ritual of Soot, actually does take out Vimere. So keep that in mind. But Ritual of Soot kills like Steel Leaf Champions, so there's that. There are definitely there's a tension between the 2 cards and which one you play. But it really all depends on which control deck you're in. But either way, both of these are going to definitely see play in various control decks. Well, we cracked the top 10, ladies and gentlemen. My number 10 is Doom Whisperer. Yeah, all the way up here at number 10. I know this is another card a lot of people are super high on, but I'm not going to be fooled by just high stats again. What I do like about this more than I liked about a creature like Lyra is that this is able to get you some kind of advantage even if it's killed the turn that you play it. You know, you tap out, you pay 5 to play this, they immediately hit it with a removal spell. That's fine. You can Surveil 2 or Surveil 4 or whatever you feel comfortable paying the life for at the time and help fix your next draw step or maybe get some relevant cards in the graveyard. So even if it is shot down, it can provide some amount of value for you on the turn you play it. And I do like that about it. But you know what I do really like about creatures with big stats is when they come at really low rates. Like my number 9, Charnel Troll. I think this is a great reason to play Golgari, you know, in terms of 3 mana creatures and you know how powerful they are for their rate. I think this stacks up in a lot of ways to Steel Leaf Champion, and sometimes will be bigger than Steel Leaf Champion the turn after you play it. It fuels its own graveyard, you know, hate ability. I say graveyard hate ability, hates on your own graveyard, but still. You know, it's able to feed itself stuff to then again eat later, if that makes any sense. So this can easily be, you know, a 6/6 the turn after you play it if you just spend a couple of mana during your upkeep pitching a card to it and then eating said card. So I think this can get to just extreme stats very, very fast. It's going to be a high priority target and a great 3-drop in the upcoming format. It's really going to help these Golgari decks play a real threat in the early game, and that's going to be important for them. But speaking of Golgari, I think maybe the best, second best really, reason to play Golgari in the set is my number 8, which is Vraska Golgari Queen. I think this is definitely the better of the 2 Planeswalkers in the set. In a vacuum, Raoul actually looks better, but in the proper deck, Vraska is absolutely crazy. You know, the +1 or +2 ability really didn't look like that much to me at first glance, but again, after getting a couple of reps in with the Vraska deck in the lab, you know, it turns out that this is what a lot of people expect it to be. The +2 ability is great because as soon as you play it, she goes up to 6 loyalty and you draw a card. Even if you have to sacrifice a random land or another, you know, non-important permanent, then it's still a great value because you have a Planeswalker with a not ignorable amount of loyalty on the battlefield that'll usually make it until the next turn. Conversely, though, you could always just abrupt decay something as soon as she hits the battlefield too, which is a pretty desirable thing to be able to do. You know, a lot of Planeswalkers will plus for card advantage, minus to kill a guy, but this does it better than just about any other Planeswalker in the format, next to maybe Teferi. So there's that, but I do want to at least briefly talk about the ultimate because it's a lot more real than a lot of people think it is. I'm telling you, the ultimate on this absolutely has to be respected. It's already won a fair amount of games for me in the limited testing I've been able to do up to this point. So Vraska is actually the absolute balls out truth, and this card will see play, and it kind of makes the Golgari deck worth playing by itself. It's as if that deck didn't already have enough pieces. But here we are at number 7, Zeke. This is also all the way up here. It's in my top 10 at least, because I think this might be one of the single best aggro creatures in the format. Upcoming here in Standard, you know. As far as Boros aggro, I think it's Aurelia and this that give us a reason to make that deck red-white in the first place. I mean, what else do you want? I talked about this in the spoiler video. What more do you want for 3 mana? For the relatively low cost of only 3 converted mana cost, you get not only haste, which means this has an effect on the battlefield the turn it comes down, but it also has Mentor. And Haste and Mentor go really, really well together, you guys. This basically gives you 4 power and stats for 3 mana and attacks the turn it hits the battlefield. That's crazy. Plus, if you needed more, there's more things. You know, your creatures don't die to burn or Goblin Chain Whirler. That's fantastic, you know, especially the Goblin Chain Whirler part, for that matter. But just against any other deck that holds red cards, you're doing pretty good if you've got this guy out, you know. He's kind of like Shalai in that case. And of course, if you just play Shalai the next turn, you know, this protects Shalai to an extent. Shalai protects this. All that's good. And I haven't even mentioned you can give it first strike. Like, there's just so much on this card. And I think, again, it's just easily, if you're going to build an aggro deck in the next Standard, this is easily one of the best reasons to do so. Now, my number 6 is a card that I'm surprised to see all the way up here on the list, but it just kept climbing up the list. As I rewrote and rewrote and rewrote, it just kept getting higher and higher up the list, and I do have some pretty high hopes for Nullhide Ferox. There are a couple of reasons I think green is such a good week 1 or week 2 deck in this format, and Nullhide Ferox is one of the biggest reasons. for that belief, you know. For just 4 mana, you again get ridiculous stats. There's so many crazily statted creatures in this set. You know, 4 mana gets you 6/6 in stats. And it doesn't have all the way hexproof, but it does have just enough hexproof. You know? It makes cards like Assassin's Trophy and Seal Away like way, way, way worse. It makes cards like Vraska's Contempt like almost unplayable, you know? So, like, Null-Eyed Ferox is actually very serious, and I think it's going to take Vinemare's slot in a lot of these green stompy decks, just because 6/6 is crazy, you know? Even if they have the removal spell for it, they have to tax the resources a little bit. You know, they might not be able to play the spells they wanted to play on their turn. You know, you could push them a turn behind in tempo just by playing with this card and forcing them to deal with it. Because if they don't deal with it, it's a problem. It's a serious problem for them. So, Null-Eyed Ferox doesn't look like much to some players. Looks like the world to some other players. But to me, I think it's going to be a very solid role player in Mono Green Stompy or Green Black Stompy again. And that definitely gives it, you know, a really high spot on my list. Now, my number 5 is a card that's kind of falling out of favor with a lot of people who write Magic content on the internet. I can't tell you how many pros I've seen this week tell me that March of the Multitudes isn't as good as I think it is, but honestly, I won't budge. I think this card is fantastic. Now, the number one thing I want to drive home here, and the number one thing I don't think people are valuing high enough, is how well this card, you know, plays in multiples, how well it plays with itself. You know, the first one helps you cast the second one helps you cast the third one. It snowballs into this huge event, you know. But the best part about the card is the instant speed. You can play this on your opponent's combat step. You can play this at the end of their turn, and then maybe play Benalish Marshal, or Radiant Destiny, or some other Anthem effect like that. For all your little 1/1 lifelink guys. I just think there are multiple applications for the card. It's way more versatile than you might think it is. Decent on defense, decent on offense, great to play at the end of their opponent's turn. Combines with Anthem effects really well. I just don't know what else you want from a card like this. I think the instant speed pushes it into a realm that's absolutely, in some ways, broken. I'll go that far. Now, I know a few minutes ago I went on and on about how crazy Zeke was, but I actually think there's an even better aggro 3-drop in this format, and that's my number 4, Legion Warboss. Eventually, you'll amass this giant board of tokens over the course of just a couple of turns, even if you're not attacking with Warboss. If you are attacking with it, though, it's extremely aggressive, you know. It's got Mentor, and it's basically worth 3 power by itself as well. So, just everything about Warboss is good, you know. It's not easy to find something wrong with this card. I just don't have any complaints. So, you know, I just think it's going to be a very special creature in the upcoming format and is going to see play in not only more than one deck, but more than one kind of deck. It's not restricted just to seeing play in aggro. Don't look now, guys. We're in the top 3. Exciting. And my number 3 is Night of Autumn. Totally seriously. This is going to see main deck play in Collected Company in Modern. If it doesn't see main deck play, it's definitely in the sideboard. Just because it eliminates, you know, multiple slots in the sideboard. You know, that deck already plays like 2 cards in its board that this card does by itself. So this could see sideboard play if nothing else, but I would imagine this will end up seeing main deck play in Collected Company because of how ridiculously versatile it is, and it's also going to make sure that it sees standard play, along with its creature type. Selesnya Knights or Abzan Knights actually looks like a very real deck right now, and this is in that. This is a 4 of in that all day, you know. Keeps you from having to play a more mana-intensive card, like, say, Thrashing Brontodon, for instance. But if you're not looking to kill artifacts and enchantments, then it's not, in some ways, dead card, you know. Against aggro, this gains you some life back. Against control, it's a big creature. So I just think it's good almost no matter what you're playing against. You're going to have an option that you want. I am a sucker for good enter the battlefield triggers. I want my creatures to get me value, even if they die, like literally the turn I play them. I want to get something out of them. And this allows you to get, you know, very specific things depending on the situation. It's a Swiss Army knife. It's going to see tons and tons of play, if only for the ridiculously high levels of versatility. But all the way up here at number 2, and I'm actually fairly convinced of this, I've got Pelt Collector. Pelt Collector is unbelievably strong. It is a crazy strong card, and if anything is going to make Mono Green Stompy a real deck in the first couple of weeks, if nothing else, it's probably this card. Mono Green did not lose that much to the rotation. I've been talking about that for months. You know, it keeps most of its important pieces. It's still got turn 2 Steel Leaf Champion, which was already a ridiculous play. But Pelt Collector gives it another great 1-drop. That sort of helps mitigate not getting Lionel Relves on turn 1. You know, If you didn't get Lana Relves, can't turn 2 Steel Leaf, boo-hoo. That sometimes hurts because you just go like Branch Walker on turn 2 and you feel bad. But with Pelt Collector, you can go Pelt Collector turn 1 if you don't get your Relves. And then, Branch Walker on turn 2 or Crawl Harpooner or whatever you're playing. Because that's a very good card too. But, whatever you're playing, Thorn Lieutenant, I don't know. And this will evolve, this is a good +1/+1 counter. Obviously, if Merfolk Branchwalker got a +1/+1 counter and became a 3-power guy, then if Merfolk Branchwalker dies, Pelt Collector will get yet another counter. Obviously, when Steel Leaf champions die, it'll get a counter. When they come into play, it'll get a counter. Galta, when it comes into play or dies, Pelt Collector gets a counter. It's just, I could see a world where Pelt Collector gets to play, 4/4 relatively easily in these mono green decks and could even be a decent 1-drop in decks outside of mono green, which I know sounds crazy. But, a lot of mid-range decks that play, 22, 24 creatures are going to really, really, really like Pelt Collector. Not to mention the fact you could get a lot of use out of this in an Aristocrats deck where you control what creatures die. So, Pelt Collector's crazy. It's probably going to see more than just standard play, too, because this is just a super solid 1-drop, no matter how you slice it in just about any format. Now, before we hit number 1, I just want to very, very quickly, I promise you, go over some honorable mentions here. Because there was stuff I wanted to put on the list, but I don't feel like quite made it. Like Swiftblade Vindicator, that's a good-looking Magic card, you guys. In conjunction with Mentor and Anthem effects, auras and stuff like that, the card looks great, but I'm not sure. I'm a little skittish about it in a Chain Whirler meta, first of all. And even if you can get a Mentor, counter on it, then it's still going to die to shock and stuff. It's just not, I don't think, the best 2-mana investment in the world. But if it goes unchecked for a turn or two and you can get its power a little bit bigger, then it's a pretty dangerous creature. So I think Vindicator's great, but not quite great enough. Same thing with Tristani. Tristani might be a great replacement for Regal Caracal, and these Selesnya Tokens decks might be a little bit more of a thing than they have been in the last few years. Also, just want to briefly bring up Experimental Frenzy, because it wasn't in the Sleepers video, and it probably should have been. So I just love this card, and I think that it's very easy for some decks, aggro and burn decks, to effectively draw 3 cards in a turn off of this, Most of the joke is just donate this to your opponent or something. But I actually think it's way more powerful than that. I kind of think you don't want your opponent to be able to play 3 or 4 cards off the top of their library every turn. But that's just me. And finally, just Shocklands. Like, for the longest time, Shocklands were my number 2 on the list, but it just doesn't feel like it, I don't know, it probably should be on the list. All things considered, Shocklands should probably have a spot on the list, but I just think it's too obvious. I think it's way too obvious. We all know Shocklands are going to be in literally every single important standard deck, so Shocklands, honorable mention. But number 1 is also a super important and way too obvious card, and you already know what it is, and you probably went, ugh, but it's just true. Number 1 is Assassin's Trophy, and you knew that already, and there's really nothing we can do to stop that. I know that the community is kind of turned against this card in some ways. Oh boo, we're not going to be able to play our 5-6 mana creatures with this thing around. And I understand that sentiment, but there's also something really, really exciting and tingly about getting definitely one of the single best removal spells ever, ever, ever printed in the history of Magic. This is it, you guys. I'm not saying it's the best, but it's definitely one of them, and I don't think that that's a question. I don't think that's an outrageous statement. I think that this is probably in the top 5 removal spells that have been printed in the last 25 years. This will probably be just short of literally everywhere once the next standard rolls around. And that's not even mentioning, Modern and Legacy. I actually think this card gets better the farther back you go, because in Modern and Legacy, they play fewer and fewer basic lands. Standard, we play some basics, but it's still blow up your Teferi and trade it for a basic. That's good enough for 2 mana at instant speed. So, card's going to see all the play in the world. And I just don't think I don't think that this is a controversial decision. It just is the best card. But we made it, guys. We actually made it through the list. I'm tapped out for now. That's all I got, but make sure you go into the comments section and take it easy on me. And do all the other stuff. Check out my sponsors over at TCG Player. First link in the description down there. If you're still in the mood to pre-order a box, you can still get them for very, very cheap, surprisingly, from TCG Player. Way cheaper than MSRP, way cheaper than most LGS, although support your LGS if you can. But if they're gouging you on the prices, go get a box of Guilds of Ravnica, on pre-order from TCG Player for like $93 right now. Heck of a deal. And if you want to know any of the prices on any of the stuff that I talked about today, or any other cards, they're a good source for that too. Decent price guide now that we don't have stuff like Beckett. So maybe we do have Beckett, but we don't have Inquest, and I missed Inquest. But in any case, check out the link in the description. Go over there. It helps me out when you do that. You can also help me out by checking out the Patreon if you're still here. You might not be. I imagine like 2/3 of the audience is gone. But if you want to, it would really help if you just throw $1 a month in the Patreon. Don't ask for too much, but I try to give you as much value as I can. Not only will I let you know what videos and decks we're uploading the day before I upload them, get a jump on the rest of the community, but you'll also be able to vote on what decks come first in the first couple of weeks of the format. That's actually pretty important. So get in there, throw me $1 a month if you can, and help me pick what decks to talk about first. And with that, I think I'm actually for realsies done this time. So I guess I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Hope you enjoyed the list. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.